Anyway, I want to welcome you for being here. We have some good topics. I think the first three are really very much interrelated. And the first one is of what value are techniques that require specific ukemi to safely or properly work? Are they techniques or performances? And my question is, I mean, I learned four ukemi. Forward, back, no, actually three. Forward, back, and side. And as long as you go with the flow of the technique, I don't know what other ukemi there are. So does anyone know if there are any other?
We have in the style I started that as I was youngster, then we have forward, we have backwards, and then we have to the side, and then we call some forward hard and backwards hard, where you slam the hands in the floor.
Yeah,
and you
okay,
don't
that's four. I forgot the forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have a jumping ukemi, that you jump over somebody that is in a down position, and you jump over him and make a ukemi. Then there is
that would be a forward roll.
Yeah, and then from hand positioned and over like a flip flop, and then you hit to the sides.
Yeah. Morning, Dane. We're dealing with of what value are techniques that require specific ukemi to safely or properly work. And
Sensei, to the side, there's barrel roll falls. So you can do a side fall that you normally slap, but you can also do a barrel roll fall, which is like you got the forward fall where you slap out on your elbows and forearms and hands, and then you've got the forward roll fall. So one stops, one continues.
right.
Barrel roll fall would be the equivalent of a forward roll fall, but going out to either side.
Yeah, I think the real issue here is, I mean, there are really only 4 or 5 basic break falls. The issue is, does the uke have the skill in the air? Does he have the skill to go along with the technique, which may make it a bigger forward roll, or and it also comes down to the tori. How well does he control his throw, so that I guess he knows pretty good chance he knows where the uke is going to land. And you know, they both have some responsibility here to make it a good looking technique, because out on the street, uke doesn't know how to land or go with the technique, and that's what causes the injury. And so I'm just asking, are there any techniques that require a specific ukemi that is not within the standard range of break falls that are taught or learned in jiu-jitsu?
One of the more challenging ones for people to learn is a flip side fall off a hand throw. You can negate the hand throw if you're capable of doing a decent flip side fall. It's great and fun on the mat. It's not so fun when you're landing on marble or concrete. The slap out just doesn't have the same effect.
Right, yeah. I know when I taught the junior high and summer school, they put my class in the multi-purpose room, and my classes were so large that it kept a couple other teachers hired for summer school. But my Brownville kids are insane. They would practice their falls on the hard linoleum concrete floor just to impress everybody else. But yeah, you do have to have control there, and you need to know how to go. Ukes need to know how to go into the technique to protect themselves. And
If you try to land with the feet first, then it takes if it's a hard floor, you are outside on grass or concrete, then if you flip the feet over first and take the hit with the feet first, that's possible to lower the damage on the body if you hit the feet first in the ground. I have tried that sometimes.
I had this would be decades ago, I had a brown belt, and I was teaching a hip throw to the rear, which is, there are some systems in the US that when they see they run the other way. And that's when you actually do the hip throw from behind the person. You're taking them over you, and your break fall is going to be a forward break fall. You know, you break the fall. And this one person, because he had a gymnastics background, decided he was going to land on his feet. And he broke both feet, which was a learning experience, unfortunately. But, you know, the purpose of the break fall is to absorb the shock of the fall. And, you know, if you can land safely on your feet, great. But I've seen a student on occasion try to break a side fall for a hand throw by putting the other hand flat on the ground, and it comes down, and they usually end up with a broken wrist. You know, so the goal is to, on a ukemi, is to spread the pain out, the shock of the impact. And if you have a good tori, he can control how hard you land anyway, to some extent.
Yeah, and if you do it fast, then it's very difficult to. But
yes.
In a okoshi, it's possible if the tori makes a okoshi and you sweep the legs first over, then it's possible to take the biggest hit with the feet. But okay, in other, like tai otoshi or something like that, then it's pretty much difficult. Then you just have to try to stay as low as possible to make it the damage as small as possible.
Right.
Or one technique is also a counterverse technique. If somebody tries to throw a okoshi and you go down on your knees when he throws, then you can throw him in the other direction, or you don't go so high in the throw. You can slip around the side then.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things you can combine the hand throw teinagi with so many judo type throws. It's almost criminal. There are some things you have to watch out for. If you're using, for example, doing a teinagi and going to tai tosh, and even sometimes a hip throw, you run the risk of dislocating their elbow as well, because your hip or leg will impact their elbow as you're doing the throw. So, you know, when you're training, there has to be a lot of cooperation between the two, which is not going to exist on the street. Because if you're defending yourself, you're not concerned too much about the injury you're causing your attacker.
And one technique is also to grab the tori's gi or hand or something, or sliding, holding your hand behind his back and sliding slowly down from the throat. And you can also make it slower, your passage to the ground.
Right. And if you hold on to his gi or coat or jacket, he can also end up throwing himself. So yeah. He needs to know how to do a side fall as well. Anyway.
Sensei, on the street, the defender's ace in the hole is the element of surprise.
Right.
They don't see a defense being mounted until it's too late. That's a good thing. That's a good thing for a defender.
Yes. Okay, let's go on to number 2, because these are all pretty similar. The role of what is the role of athletic martial arts techniques, jump spin kicks, jumping neck scissor takedowns, etc.? Is it to build confidence, precision, and skill, or is it a useful practical technique, or is it a last ditch technique?
I think that's one of my questions. Yeah.
These are your questions this morning, Dane.
Yeah, and I think the gist there is the really complex things, should you or do you have an expectation that those are useful as they are? If somebody's attacking you on the subway, are you going to jump up and put your legs around their neck and spin, and take them down like that? Or is that something that just makes well, if I can do that, my hip throw is really good. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think of those kinds of things?
Years ago, I had a student who his nickname was Sasquatch, but his big bushy hair. But anyway, he was basically like Seki. He was like skin, bone, and muscle. Really light kid. He maybe stood 5 feet. You swung at him, and he could take 2 steps and have a scissors around your neck with his legs. And that was his baby. And there are some students who have unique skills. And this allows them to do these athletic techniques or unusual techniques. And it's fascinating to watch. I don't know what the viability on the street is.
So with something like that, do you think that's an old technique, that the jumping scissor stuff has been around for like over 100 years at least, Do you think those things came into jujitsu because there was like a jujitsu person who was actually very good at those in real life and he wanted to hold on to it? And then everybody learns it, but 1 or 2 people can really use it? Or do you think it's something that the people that brought it in couldn't actually do and they just thought it was good for their students to learn? Do you think it came from a place of somebody actually used that and was good at it and then brought it in? Or do you think it was if they came up with it an exercise for other people to do?
I think it's unique to the person. This one student, he could take 2, like I said, he could take 2 steps, and he knew how to do a scissors. He's a brown belt. He knew, okay. He said, "Sensei, does this work?" One day he takes his uke, swings at him, he blocks it, grabs hold, takes 2 steps up the person, sets the scissors, and throws him. And which really surprised the class. But usually what I've done, if a student comes up with a unique combination or unique technique, I would usually say, "Would you mind teaching it to the class?" Because to me, that the key is if it can be taught to others and others can do it reasonably, they will get better, then it's a viable technique. If it's unique to him, then it's his baby. And no one else in the class could do it. I mean, because they didn't have his build, they didn't have his physical coordination, all these other things that come into play and all of you have probably have a unique capability somewhere. And it may be simply being because you've been in this for so long, you can transition from one technique to another as an absolute no-brainer, which is a no-brainer. But your students look at you and they say, "Oh my God, how does he do that?" And
I would say the arm equivalent of what you're talking about would be karate makakomi, where you land an elbow upside their head before you use you reach your arm over his right shoulder, and then you go down. And the beautiful thing is that when you go down, it doesn't matter what you land on because his body is your cushion.
Right.
That's a whole body technique. And ukiyo-toshi, we have 4 kinds of ukiyo-toshi in the Budoshin system, and that's a total commitment. But it's one of those things where you could take somebody down who's muscular and 6'5", because they don't see it coming, and they're off balance. And once again, you're going to use their body as a cushion, so you could do it on a hard floor. You just get up there, you got your arm around their neck, you put on your left blinker, and down they go, and you land on them. Thank you very much.
I think part
you
of
have that, and it's a kind of commitment, but not with your legs.
Yeah, I think part of it is, and what we're saying here is, we're helping students develop the confidence to do things that they didn't think they might otherwise be able to do.
Absolutely.
And once they see they can do one thing, they're willing to try, particularly younger people, and this includes young adults. They're more willing to try other things. Are you doing okay, Darren?
Yeah, I'm taking notes, Sensei. I have comments. If you want me to jump in, I have some comments.
I just, yeah, you can jump in whenever you want.
Okay, I'm ready.
You don't have to do any special ukemi to jump in.
No, it was just me. It was a lot going on. I was just trying to keep up. That's all. That's all. All right, I'll start with I'll preface with the topic that we're currently on right now, and I think can you just say the last topic question again, just so I could start off?
Okay.
I have
the topic is the role of athletic martial arts techniques such as jump, spin kicks, jumping neck, scissors, takedowns, etc. Is it to build confidence, precision, and skill, or is it a useful practical technique, or is it a last-ditch technique?
I'm gonna try to answer all of that, in my opinion.
Okay.
I'm gonna try to get to all of it. So we started with right after the topic with a jumping triangle, and so going from there, I want to say that there's a place and time for these types of techniques. Typically, for a jumping triangle, which can be pulled off, I believe that if you look at it where it's pulled off to where it's possible to be executed in most case scenarios, not all, that it's almost a setup. When you watch these things, if you watch the steps of somebody doing it, they're asking for the ABCs, if you will, and that's meaning because you need A, B, C, and D to happen, so you can't execute something of something like that dynamic. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but more cases than not, usually you're pulling the person down on top of you. So if you're looking at a jumping triangle, is it possible? Yes. But is it possible or practical for real life in a self-defense scenario versus a sporting event? And then in my opinion, I would say, no, that's not something that I would attempt to do in that environment. In a real life environment, I wouldn't attempt to do that because, one, it may not be able to be executed to what you think it may look like when you're in practice, or two, it's not a sporting event where if you don't succeed in that technique, then you're putting yourself in even more danger than what you probably were in. So then we moved on to a scissor throw, canapacini, right? And whether you're doing that or forward or back, whatever you're doing with that. And so, okay, kind of similar to the scenario that I just presented in a triangle throw. A triangle choke using the legs. But this technique is extremely effective. Now, again, for me, at all costs, I would try to stay off the floor in a real life self-defense scenario. But this technique is extremely effective. It does severe damage to the knees, which is why it was eliminated from being used in sporting events such as judo or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because people were destroying knees and legs by trying to attempt to do this technique. So if you can execute that throw, which takes a little bit of athletic ability, you have the potential to really do some significant damage to the person that you're trying to perform it on. So even in classroom scenarios, I'd be extremely careful in demonstrating that and practicing it. if you're ever trying it. And then you have what Dave was just talking about the Soto Makokomi or the Karada Makokomi and the Uki Otoshi. And these things are sacrifice throws as well, right? So again, you're sacrificing your upward position to be on the floor to do significant damage to the person that you're working with. In judo, the Karada Makokomi or Soto Makokomi, whichever one you want to refer to it as, and the Uki Otoshi are completely legal throws. However, if you refer that back to the original topic that we started with today, you have to actually take a fall in that throw. One, I would say the Karada Makokomi or the Soto Makokomi, you're throwing that throw. It's a complete sacrifice throw. That person typically isn't getting up. You know, if you that's a pretty, it's an advanced throw in my opinion, but it's a pretty easily executed throw when you're doing it. And that is something that I don't believe that if you execute correctly, that that the person that you've done it to will avidly get up if you don't spare them in doing so, which Dave was referring to. Uki Otoshi, they might not get up forever. If you truly execute that throw without the assistance of an uke to be able to perform it in demonstration. If that throw is executed the way it's designed to throw in real life or even in competition, that, I mean, you're designed to land right at the base of the forehead, which could do unforgiving damage to the neck, spine, back, whatever it might be, unconscious, losing teeth, breaking nose. I mean, all of those things will come into play. I mean, we typically, I mean, obviously we short of trying to show off on a hard surface and demonstrating that we can take falls, if you really try to throw that throw in real life and it's on concrete or grass or whatever, that person may never get up for the rest of their life, executed as it's designed. And then going back to the falls and trying to stick with number one, the first part of the topic or the question was, are there any other falls? No, I think the 4 falls that we've identified are what they are. How do we apply them? How do we take falls in an effort to avoid injury within a training environment is the reason why we're doing them. However, there's some that get pretty brutal, right? So if you go into, and I'll try to cover as many of these as I was listening to, if you go into a kip scenario, we refer to it in a bunch of other different ways, almost like a forward flip, or you in landing into a break fall. There's a few things with that for me. I like to say that if the tori is experienced enough and the uke knows how to take a fall, you should be able to control that fall. Almost every single thing that is in our curriculum to be able to help and assist the uke take the fall without necessarily have to take in a kip. Almost. That's like 99.9%. And for me, I've tried to evolve my system and when I'm teaching to avoid the necessary constant abuse of what we've been accustomed to in traditional training. When you're taking the constant and repetitive beating and abuse of a kip fall, people only want to take about 2 or 3 of those at the most. And then they're like, I'm done for the rest of class. And then they may not consider coming back the next class. If it's a regular student, then obviously it's likely that they'll be there. But even those sometimes are reluctant to come back because they're sore and damaged from the previous night. So I like to use all of the basic falls in an effort to preserve the practitioner's longevity in training and continue to keep them interested and motivated and coming back. And that has so I focus in my teaching to preserve practitioners in an effort of continuing to have them return, stay committed to the system and the art without having to do that. Now, then we went into, okay, we're talking about different ways of taking a fall. And Dave had mentioned a barrel roll. And yes, that is one of the ways of preserving the uke instead of having to take one of these falls. And I agree with that 100%. except for when you get to an advanced level. And there's a point to where you want to be fluent in your technique and managing the speed of the technique and understanding that the uke understands what you're doing as the experience of the demonstration of the technique that you're trying to do versus taking the fall. Some of those techniques you cannot take a barrel roll out of a technique, because then if the tori decides to change direction, if they're doing it at a higher level, then you're literally injuring yourself. So I'm very, very cautious in being able to say, okay, I'm okay with you taking that barrel fall or that barrel roll, because the direction may change in stride of what the tori may be attempting to do versus what the uke may be assuming what you're doing. And then you're breaking the flow of, okay, now you're anticipating the fall, which is incorrect. You shouldn't be doing that, because you're taking away from the tori and being able to demonstrate the technique that they're trying to do. And then it not only do you have the possibility of an injury, but then you don't even have the technique that's performed. So how do you perform it when it's necessary? Okay, the next part that I have is then is in an effort to do some of these things, you have to understand how you're throttling the pressure with the technique that you're applying. In real life, nobody takes a fall unless you're throttling the technique. Are you going to move that individual? Yes, you're going to make that individual move because they feel something that's going to be unnatural to the anatomy, to where they're going to try to work away from what is either pressure or a point to where they feel there's no other room for them to be able to move with. So they compensate for it by trying to move out of it. If you're going fast, there is never an opportunity for them to do that. Therefore, you're doing the damage of what we do in class to try to avoid in a falling out of it. You avoid that. And then you have to be able to move on to something else, which is what Sensei was referring to, and being able to transition from one thing to the next once you do that. Because if you're doing damage initially and the person that you're doing it to in a real life scenario for self-defense, you've likely broke something, but that doesn't mean the threat went away. The threat is still standing in front of you. And typically you have other factors such as adrenaline, which they don't realize that thing is broken yet, and they're still trying to do damage to you. Okay, that was a lot. I don't know if that answered anything, if that shed some light on some things. And if you want to see an uke otoshi, I have a good one that's on video with a good uke taking a fall. I can share my screen with it if you want to see it.
Okay.
Okay, let me get some water here.
Comments in here is
I've got a quick question, because you used a term I'm not familiar with, and that is a kip fall. Is that spelled K-I-P?
Yeah, that's how I spell it. And yes, that's like the forward flip to a break fall scenario. That's a higher advanced type fall that you would take.
Interesting. So like a flip side fall could be a type of kip fall? Is that's a term I'm not familiar with.
This one is typically straight over the top, just like a basic forward flip, and you land into your break fall position.
So you're saying it's a forward flip and you land on your feet, or you land on your back slapping out?
Yep. Side slapping out.
Landing on your back slapping out, yeah.
Yep.
okay. Let me throw a couple of things in here. I'm going to deal with the last thing first, which Darren brought up, which is of real critical importance. And it also, like, we'll just start out with pepper spray. If some people say, it's a great device to use, and I say make sure you have a stream out of spray, and make sure you have alcohol based, not water based, because most law enforcement agencies are limited water based on pepper spray. But even if you spray the person, and assuming they're not on any drugs, there is still probably several seconds before that pepper spray really has a major impact. And several seconds, an attacker can do a lot of damage to you. I mean, these are things that people just need to be aware of. I have seen some police videos. I think the scariest one was a guy was high on PCP. He was buck naked. He was shot 5 or 6 times in the chest, and he was still coming at the police until he bled out. So, you know, if a person's on, usually I tell my students, if you're being attacked by a person who's high on drugs, you need to find a baseball bat or a 2x4 and break a leg. Because they may not feel the pain, but they can't chase you. You know, it's kind of a stupid way of looking at things, but you have to deal with reality. And this brings back something else that Darren brought up, is that because jiu-jitsu is not a sport, it's meant to defend yourself. The intent is to prevent your attacker from continuing his attack. I'm going to stay within California law right now. You can do whatever is necessary to prevent the person from continuing their attack so that you can safely escape. Those are the two things that have to be in play. And many of the students, because we have what's called a submission, which comes from judo, I think, and you can tap out. Neither of these things would come into play in a street situation. If you're going to do a wrist press on the street, you do the wrist press, it breaks the person's wrist. That's what the technique is supposed to do. It's a hard concept for a lot of students to accept that they are they're intentionally injuring another person, and they have a legitimate reason to do so, but it's still something that goes contrary to our upbringing as a reasonably decent human being. And because I've had students that have been through this, their most difficult part after they've said, you know, I defended myself, the guy went down, you know, yada, yada, yada. They're upset that they hurt the person. You know, their conscience comes into play. And that's, as sensei, that's one of the most difficult things we have to deal with, is that all these techniques that, you know, if you do a shoulder lock or takedown at a normal speed, you're going to dislocate and or separate their shoulder. And they may fall down and get a concussion. If you do an ukiyo-toshi, they may hit their head, it may kill them or do permanent brain damage. Notwithstanding damage to the spine, and they become a quadriplegic and all these other things that come into play. And that's, how do you say, a really heavy duty issue to deal with, that in many other martial arts you don't have to deal with, because there are sports, they have rules, there are techniques you cannot do. In jiu-jitsu, there are no techniques you can't do. You just have to, we just expect our students to use good judgment. And that's something that's hard. It's hard to teach a student how to use good judgment. It's kind of something they have to walk into the dojo with. And if they can't,
I think that you know, what most people don't really understand, and I'll just blatantly just call it out, especially the BJJ practitioners, right? Is they feel like that system is designed for practical self-defense, and it's only about asking a series of questions. And okay, before I even get into that topic, I like to say, okay, well, you're just doing a fraction of what jiu-jitsu is, right? It's Japanese Jujitsu, and you're doing a small fraction of it. But it's only about answering of any question you want to. If you just ask a series of questions, you have to understand the reality of it. And they're very, very simple. And it's as simple as doing this. If there's a referee, it's a sport, just a series of questions, right? If there's techniques that you could do or things that you can do that they say that you can't do it in that environment, well, it's a sport. You know, if you're not going to allow me to gouge your eyes out, or if I can't bite you if I need to, right? It's a sport, right? If there's all of these things, like you can go on down the list, right? I don't need to continue to go on, but I mean, understanding reality versus a sporting event is very simple when you just ask them basic questions.
And that's a great point too, that kind of so as I'm hearing everything and thinking about it more, I'm kind of thinking about ukemi a little differently too. So like when I say things require specific ukemi, I don't just mean the fall itself, like the actual taking one of the four directions or whatever. Just the entire response. Like, how does the uke behave, right? So, like you were just mentioning, eye gouging and biting and pinching and squeezing and twisting and pulling back fingers and pressing fingernails, all that stuff. The uke will not be doing that. So when you're putting them in a really complicated hold, that hold only works if they're not biting your forearm. You know what I mean? It only works if they're not poking you in the eyes while they're biting you and pulling your fingers back. So you think that technique works because whenever you do it, nobody's ever given you any gruff about it, and they get thrown. Then in a real situation, you put somebody in that, they panic and start freaking out, and they're poking you with fingers and biting you. And so when you're practicing for, let's change the word ukemi to response. Like you're training for a specific response, even Kodagaeshi. If the person doesn't know what you're trying to do, they won't let you do it. If you just walk up to a person on the street, grab their wrist and start twisting it, they just walk in a circle going, what are you trying to do? You know what I mean? Like they need to stand still, let you pull their arm out, let you lock their elbow in, let you turn, you can get them in it, but you're going to start grabbing their elbow and holding their shoulder still and putting a foot behind them. You know what I mean? Just if you just try doing it to your girlfriend or wife, she's just going to walk in a circle around you and be like, what are you doing? That's cute. That's what you learned. They don't know what to do. And it actually got me thinking about the idea of ukemi at all. And I'm realizing now that it's its own art form. Originally, it wasn't in jujitsu. And you would just, like, the only way to really do jujitsu is against somebody who has no idea what jujitsu is, so they can't give you the correct response.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
I Dan, you made some good points, and so like, look, first of all, I see this all the time, right? I've seen Sensei Kirby do it. I've had Sensei Kirby do it to me. I've had Sensei Jack do it to me. I've had other Sensei do it to me as well. In training, we always have the give take, right? The gray area. The tori's trying to do a technique that's going to be effective, and uke needs to have some sort of give take area. And I like to break it down, and I refer to this as my inspiration. That's what I think Sensei Kirby does me, when we add in the little things like you're talking about, because without the inspiration, then you get full rigidness, right? If you will, right? Like people are naturally trying to resist what's going on, but you have to demonstrate what you're not trying to do in a classroom environment is trying to injure the person that you're working with. So you demonstrate that whatever the inspiration part is, sometimes it might be a bent finger or you coming at the nail or doing a pinch type scenario, which often to me gets referred to as you're cheating. And I'm like, I'm just doing real life things. I'm not cheating. I'm just doing, if I hit you like on a nerve or something, then I'm doing the things that are going to be effective to you, right? I'm making you move. I'm inspiring you to do what I want without injuring you, right? That's what I'm trying to do. And so if I simulate a strike, a Mitsubishi Timmy or something like that, and they stay rigid, then I explain it to them, like I break it down. And my students, I'm very close to them, and there's people that could take some of the things that I would do in demonstration. So if you simulate, let's say, a strike or an Timmy Mitsubishi, whatever, right, and they stay rigid, and I explain it to them, like, look, this strike was performed in an effort for you to loosen up so I can move to the next thing and demonstrate my technique, right? That's what it's designed for. And you stay rigid, then I need to touch you a little more, right? Like you do what's comfortable for you, but I'm trying to be effective with the technique that I'm doing. So you're working into a deeper shade of gray, if you will, right? Okay, You didn't move. I explained it to you. Okay, I'm going to touch it a little bit more. Okay, now that was uncomfortable to them, which now they're like, oh, wait. And then that takes away the element of surprise that makes them inspired to do what you're trying to get to the next spot, right? When we're showing somebody outside of when we're demonstrating a technique such as a kodakai, I'm going to stay on the same technique that you referred to someone who's not participating in a classroom environment, you're not trying to injure them. They don't know how to take a fall. Typically, they don't understand ukemi or taking a fall or bent. They know that what's going to be natural to them is, okay, something got really tight on my body, and now I'm trying to avoid, that. But the person that's trying to demonstrate is like, don't roll in a circle, but you're not trying to injure them either, right? So you have that kind of like merry-go-round, if you will, of the circle, because the person trying to demonstrate, I'm not trying to injure them. The person is like, that's not natural to me. I got to get away from it. And so it's never effective. In real life, that merry-go-round never happens, because if you do what's necessary, you either immediately break that, and if I just stop right there, it's much harder to perform a technique in a classroom environment to somebody else in the classroom, because they know what you're doing. The reason why we take falls, the reason why we try to compete with each other, the reason why we do all of these other things, than to somebody in real life, which they have no idea what's going on. We do scenario-based entries so we can practice things to be able to learn it to become second nature to us. But those things are up to your own imagination when you're in a real life confrontation or an effort to be able to defend yourself. So those things come really fast. You're responding really fast, and then you're actually doing damage. And then again, I'd like to emphasize the fact that if you're doing those things, then you're likely doing the damage. Then referring back to what Sensei Kirby was just saying, then just because you do the damage, even if it's a break, that threat still may be standing right in front of you. And so you have to be able to move on. Yeah.
Okay,
That's exactly where multiple technique flow comes in, because we simulate the actual strikes to buy time so we can go to that next technique or go to the next level.
Right.
Yeah.
In real life, kodagai is never a throw. It's something that hurt their wrist enough to make them take a step back before you choked them, or it's a thing that distracted them before you grabbed them, or, only in the dojo is a kodagai a throw, because your partner jumps into a throw, because you throw yourself rather than break your wrist or whatever. And, it became two things. Like, you're learning how to get a kodagai done to you without it ever working. If somebody tries to put us in one, we know how to get out of it by taking ukemi or whatever. So in the dojo, you end up doing, let me practice a technique, and then let me have a response to that practice. So you're practicing responding to it in a jujitsu way, and you're practicing doing it in a jujitsu way. And I think that's newer. I think judo has a lot to do with that. Before that, you didn't teach ukemi. Ukemi was what an advanced person had figured out over the years, and a beginning student just got thrown. So I think early on, a white belt was that completely untrained stranger that you're trying to put in a kodagai, and they don't know how to fall. They don't know how to do anything. So those early jujitsu guys, when they were training with a white belt or whatever, they were just beating up untrained people, seeing what is their response. How do they respond to these techniques? Then over time, that goes away, and you don't get those responses anymore because people are tired of it. And now they know how to, like, when you start doing that, I'm just going to fall on my back instead, and you start getting that ukemi coming in. And over time, you teach the ukemi first, and then you teach how to do the things. In early jujitsu, you didn't teach the ukemi, you just got your wrist twisted a lot, And I think that's kind of put us in this place where, like, we don't necessarily, like, we understand that when you put somebody in a kodagai, it doesn't go the way we see it go, But I think there's this expectation that kodagai is a throw, that it's supposed to look like Aikido, where you just go like this and then the person jumps in the air and, their legs go over their head and the whole thing. You expect that in a bar fight. Like, somebody grabs your shirt, you go like that. You expect them to flop over and land on the bar, that whole thing. And those responses don't happen. So it's very like the ukemi itself is another batch of techniques you've learned that are street effective in what to do when you get attacked. And they can be a hindrance when you're trying to think of what will happen when I use this technique. You can't expect the ukemi response.
Yeah, so I say that when I'm teaching. I
Yeah.
actually, because I don't believe that often enough through classroom environments that the sensei actually says that, like, look, don't expect this big elaborate fall in real life because it's not going to happen. So I specifically say that. And then the other thing that I focus on when I'm doing things is I want to know if the technique that I'm performing can be exposed as well. Dane, you experienced it. I'm like, look, if you can do something when I'm doing this technique, I want you to do it. I want to know if my position is compromised. So show me, can you kick me? Can you punch me? Can you bite me? Can you eye gouge me? Can you do something else? Or do I truly have control, right? Is it truly effective what I'm doing? If not, I want to know. I do that often, especially with people in my classroom. When they come in there, they're going to try to do everything they could possibly do to me. And I want to make sure that I'm not compromising my own position in an effort to move. And then the last piece about everything that you were saying, yes, all of what you said was accurate. When you get to a higher level, and this would go back to what Sensei was saying and what Dave was saying, is, yeah, they're not taking this elaborate fall, but transitioning from one to the next. So sometimes it's not always completing the entire technique, more as it is an effort to make someone move in a position for you to be able to do the next thing. So you may not do a kotegaeshi, right? Because they may not take this elaborate fall, or you may not want to break their wrist at a time, but you need them to move or to be able to be manipulated to move to a certain spot so you can do the next thing to put you in a better position of maybe compliance or restraint or come along, or just be able to hold them down for a minute till somebody else gets there for help.
That's really important. Even if you break their wrist, they have a good arm, a good hand to reach down and grab their boot pistol and shoot you in the face. So you're very right, Darren. You need to continue until you know that you have the control you desire. And if they still have an arm free and they're on the ground, that needs to be dealt with.
I have one point about if you have an unexperienced person or a small child and you have to make a technique, then you actually have to learn them to make the ukemi during the technique by steering them in the right direction. Maybe in a kotegaeshi, to using your elbow to steer his hand to the right direction where they have to go. So they learn the route to fall, that they go in the right direction. If somebody is very unexperienced or a small child learning jujitsu to them, I use that technique to you use your own body and your own body parts to steer them in the right direction to the fall. So they learn the ukemi during the technique.
Okay.
There's something else that just kind of an aside I'd like to mention. We keep using the term jujitsu. And since the early 1990s, when you're out on the street and you're talking to people, and I learned this prepping for the October 7th seminar, people would say, I don't want to roll on the ground. I'm not interested in jujitsu. Their perception of jujitsu is Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And it's frustrating because they basically took our martial art that we like so much, and when it became so prevalent and so popular, but that's very much a sport. No punching, no groin grabs, no biting, no gouging. It's not good for multiple attackers. There's so many limitations with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and the fact that it's perceived that way by the public is frustrating. It's like I want to always say traditional jiu-jitsu or stand-up jiu-jitsu or streetwise jiu-jitsu or Japanese jujitsu. In other words, put a clarifier in front of it, because that's the world we're in right now, and it's frustrating.
Interesting you brought that up, Dave. I'm literally trying to prepare an article for Sensei for Kokoro, and the title of it until he gets it and may change it or whatnot is in is jujitsu living the legacy. And it's gonna be about leading back to origin, and then looking at what people commonly think jujitsu is in today's modern era.
There you go. Origin Jujitsu. That's another term.
Yeah.
Um,
This is the second time this has happened in my life too. I had to go through this with Taekwondo in the 80s. Everything was Taekwondo instead of karate. And you got karate got pushed away, and everyone, if you said you do karate, they would just be like, oh, wow, Taekwondo, really? And everything was Taekwondo. Every little kid took Taekwondo. Everything was that. And then that bubble just kind of pops and you end up back with karate. And I think the same thing will happen here. In the 60s, it was judo, 50s and 60s, judo, judo, judo. Jiu-jitsu kind of came in a little and went away. Then this Brazilian thing, I think that bubble will pop and we'll be back to knowing the difference again. But yeah, right now we're in that Taekwondo karate phase. Every corner
kung fu
dojo is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Everybody's Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Yep.
But actually,
11 and Brazilian jiu-jitsu next to each other.
And
What-
I'd like to interject a couple of things here, and just in terms of phrases that have come up. I've had a couple of students that have ultimately used kote gaish or tenagi on the street, and I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, I did the kote gaish," and the guy kind of crumbled. And so the concept that the guy, this person on the street is going to do a nice fall for any technique that you do is a real misnomer. And I think what some of you have said in terms of that the student has to be trained how to fall and how to move with the technique is not only for their safety, well, it's mainly for their safety, but so the other person can complete the technique. The other thing is, and I don't know how the term twisting the joint is what you mean by twisting the joint, because the reality is you don't twist a joint, you lock the joint, and then you use the torque. You apply pressure to that lock, or it's called torque. It's like with a socket wrench or a torque wrench, and that is what causes the technique to take effect, and that's where the issue of control comes in. I mean, I'll have students that will initially try and twist the wrist, and I say, no, you lock it, and then you push against that lock, and that's what causes it to happen. And it takes a lot less energy than twisting it. And if you lock that joint and the person tries to get out of that and counter it, it's going to hurt a lot more than if you simply twist the joint. So, and I think sometimes like on some of these ukemis with some of the additional terminology that came up, we have our own terminologies, and sometimes it needs to be explained. Another item is there's no such thing as cheating in jiu-jitsu. Yeah, it's anything and everything you do is legal. I have very rarely in a sensei who teaches traditional or Japanese or stand-up jiu-jitsu say to a student if they do something that isn't quote unquote appropriate, they'll never say it's illegal, because it isn't. And having worked with Hal Brocious, I mean, sticking a finger up the nose and twisting it, not the nose, your finger, or sticking your finger in their ear, or ripping their lips or things like that, those are all completely legal things to do. Biting is, I mean, he even taught us how to bite properly. if you want to try it in class, you can have students fighting each other because they all need tetanus shots, probably some stitches and all that other stuff. But you can bring in some French rolls. Make sure they're not stale. Have one student holding the French roll, and have another student taking a big bite out of it, twisting it like a pit bull would.
Turkey leg.
Well, you don't want to use turkey leg or chicken breast because you have a possibility of running into bone or gristle,
Realism.
something like that, and that can, you don't want to have a student choking and you have to do CPR. But
About realism.
you're pretty safe. But if you want to make it a contest, what you do is you weigh all the French rolls ahead of time to make sure they're the same weight, and then you weigh them after everyone in the class is taking their bite out of their own French roll, and whoever roll now has the greatest weight difference is the one who has the best bite. Is it stupid? Yes. Does it make an impact? Yes.
People remember stupid.
Pardon?
Another kind of bite is a shark bite.
Oh, the shark bite. That's.
And those are awesome, especially to spring it on somebody when they don't see it coming. Put it on their thigh when they got you from behind.
What I used to do when I taught it, I would say back in the junior high, I'd have two chairs on the edge. I wouldn't even have this on the mat. I just have two chairs sitting next to each other, or maybe four chairs, like in a movie theater, and I'd get a couple girls and say, "Here's what's going to happen. The boy that's sitting next to you is going to start getting friendly. I want you to take and I want you to take your hand and slowly slide it across their thigh to the inside because you're sitting next to them, and then you're going to do a shark bite." Okay? The boys that have come in and I'd say, "Okay, here's what's I'd tell them, okay, you're going to sit down next to this girl. I want you to try to be friendly, brother. And here's a box of popcorn." Now,
pure evil, Sensei, pure evil.
but you got to have fun with this stuff because sometimes if you have fun, people learn real fast. You've made your point. And the girls are kind of hesitant at first, but when they do that first shark bite and that popcorn flies all over the classroom, I said, "Now, what would this be like in a movie theater?" And a lot of people are going to get upset. And that's what you're trying to involve. And part of that is you're trying to involve people around you. And so you have to, for example, I just put a video online from summer camp 2015. I don't know if any of you were in it. Dave might have been the only one, but we did jujitsu footwork just as a gag. I did it to Don't Rock the Jukebox as a line dance. And I've been in communication with Sony, et cetera. They've given me the criteria, and I found out that there's nothing wrong with the website, with the video. The only country that's blocking it is Russia. But I just put that out. It's called Jushin. I think it's Jushin Footwork, the musical. And it's just worth watching. I mean, because you don't have to be serious with otherwise teaching footwork is incredibly boring. And I think every one of you will agree. It's probably the most tedious thing to teach, and you have to constantly do it. The students, they just, until the light turns on or the light bulb screws in, they just don't get it. But this is such a, how do you say, stupid approach that it works, because they'll remember doing it to Don't Rock the Jukebox. So, if you want a nice instructional sequence you can teach, just go to YouTube and look up
And you know, something we're touching on here too, that just occurred to me. You know, we're focused on the practical aspects of jujitsu and the art, and that is where the focus should be. If you don't have practical jujitsu, you have nothing, right? But the side effect of that is, you know, martial arts are for your whole life. They're even for when you're not being choked by somebody on the street. It informs everything about you. And I have a problem with, like, it may not ever be appropriate for you to gouge somebody's eyes out or bite them or break their fingers or push the fingernails or do all of that. You may never ever do that. You may not have the stomach to do it. You may think that's just beyond you and you'd rather get beaten up than do that or something. There is still a benefit to learning it and discussing it and talking about it, because you can't practice thinking and limiting your thinking at the same time. You know, you're trying to develop responses to things that are immediate and the best response possible. And you have to weigh all of your options. And if pinching the inside of the thigh isn't an option, you can't choose it. So you end up, like, the only option to your mind might be sitting there frozen, panicking, hoping it goes away. You know, if you don't train to have all these options where you start thinking, well, what if I just flick him in the eye? What if I just put my finger in his ear? What if I just start screaming? What if I pinch his thigh? What if I would, you know, you start having those kinds of thoughts. And if you don't allow that kind of thinking, that creeps into everything. Like, there was the concept, it was very popular for a while, verbal jujitsu or verbal judo, I think was like the brand name, verbal judo. And that's about, you know, if somebody's trying to choke you, you throw them. If somebody's trying to attack you with an argument, what is the equivalent of receiving the argument, turning it around and throwing it, right? So you apply your judo to conversations. You, like, the principle of, you know, you got two people this far away. To get them in a hand throw, you need them to come over here, but you can't pull them towards you. So you take a step closer. You can control you in a conversation. You can't control them, right? So those little things start being how you handle a work meeting, how you approach a math problem. Like, I can't add 630 plus 70, you know, but I can add 30 and 70, and I can add 600 and 100, you know, whatever. You start thinking about things differently. And when you limit your training to things being off limits, you're teaching your mind not to explore options, you know? So I think even beyond the practical physical thing, it's still, if you're like, yeah, but I'm never going to go on the street, I'm not worried about it, I'm never going to do that, you're still negatively affecting your development, in my opinion.
Okay.
That's
One
that
thing,
sense of
particularly
peace
what
that you
what
have high enough along in your training that you can't explain, but you've examined many options, and so there's a liberation of your mind that occurs, that's an inner peace.
One of the things that Dane mentioned that has come up here is that you have all these, you know, finger thing and finger in the ear and all these other things. And part of the instructional sequence I use for jiu-jitsu is you just don't go in for, you know, a person attacks you, you just don't go in and do your technique. Your first move is a distraction. Then you do your technique, which may be a throw, a takedown, or what have you. Then, if they aren't injured yet or what have you, and if it's necessary, you do a submission or whatever else you need to do. Drop your knee into their ribs or onto the side of it or what have you. Doesn't matter. But I will have students, you know, I teach all these little things as part of the distraction. And when they're learning, I'll say, okay, your block ahead, I want you to strike towards his nose with a palm strike, or headlock, here's a shark bite, you know. And then I'll put them in situations where, okay, now you've got a headlock, or they're putting a headlock, and I'll say, what should you do? And sometimes they'll go completely blank. I said, do you know how to do a shark bite? Do a shark bite. Or they're shaking your hand and whatever technique is not working. I said, try, bending the thumbnail. Or if they say, but it's not working, I said, they've got 4 other fingers. Try another one. And eventually they learn that it's okay to do these things, because then they make what you want to do possible to do. Because very rarely can you just go in and, certainly if you got some, cousin Bubba, and he takes a swing at you, you can't just go in and do a basic hit throw on this guy. You've got to take his mind off of his, wherever it is, give him something to think about. Okay. And if it's like I don't even teach a knee to the groin. I think it's too difficult of a skill to teach most people, unless you're really close in. I'll just say, how many of you played kickball when you were kids? Or soccer? Just do a really good kick. Pretend you're trying to kick the soccer ball. And they can do that. And so it's sometimes they just have to, they need to connect the brain cells and do it often enough to where it becomes automatic. And this for all techniques, once they become automatic, then the student is going to be a lot more successful. And they're going to have better control. I like Darren's term throttle, which is, control. I believe that's controlling the speed and the pressure of the technique. Because you have to have, that's one of the unique skills that's taught in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu is control. And if you want to do a basic hit throw on a person and put them through the concrete, hunky-dory. If on the other hand, you want to put them down gently, and by gently, I mean actually where they don't hit the ground hard, you can do that if you have control. And so many times what you do in terms of injury, I don't know whether it's a moral responsibility or, you do what you believe is reasonably necessary to protect yourself. And sometimes it is a matter of just, if it's a person and they're just drunk or something like that, like there's a technique that Hal Brocious taught for getting a drunk out of your house through a doorway they don't want to go. And I took that technique and modified it for an overhead knife, downward knife thrust, where the person ends up doing a radical circumcision, or some other detachment. And it's all done with one hand, and you just keep on walking like nothing happened. And it works for a very nice technique, but you have what you have to do. The hard part of, I say it has to do with ukemis and being a good uke. The hard part for the tori is the understanding that almost anything they do has the potential of causing serious injury to their attacker. And it's just something they have to be aware of. And I think as you get higher in belt rank, by the time you're a black belt, you understand that. That's kind of a given. And then you realize, well, with control, I may be able to minimize the injury, or I may be able to use some better judgment and put maybe just break their wrist rather than dislocating their shoulder as well. And those are all judgmental things. Judgmental things are hard to incorporate in the process of doing a self-defense technique on the street, because you really don't have have time to make judgment calls.
This might be a future topic, but when we talked about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and what will in the future happen with traditional Jiu-Jitsu is that actually you have to start using all these nasty techniques, fingers in the eye, scratch in the eye, or breaking the finger, upward position when you are before you are underground, because I personally don't want to hit the ground anymore, because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is growing very big and they are learning all kind of persons these techniques. And I've even seen on YouTube, in my opinion, wrong people being taught these techniques. And if our wrong people start learning this grappling on the ground, then you really actually have to be able to finish the technique in upstand and as fast as possible, and use all methods available, because I don't want to get on the ground anymore because of BJJ.
Okay. Now, being on the ground is not a good place to be. I think you're bringing up an important issue, and that is that we as sensei have a moral, and this is a totally different topic, have a moral responsibility to weed out students who we think might not have the judgment to use what they're learning appropriately. It's like just giving out handguns or AR-15s to people and say, if you need to use it, use it. And as martial arts sensei, we don't have that liberty to just teach techniques and say, well, if you go out there and break someone's arm, it's hunky-dory. And because theoretically, and I'm not an attorney, but theoretically, if you teach something to someone and they use it on another person, that person theoretically can come back and sue you for teaching them that skill, which is a scary thought, which is why as martial arts sensei, you have this moral obligation to weed out students who you think are
But if you
use your skills inappropriately.
If you watch these attacks, I've watched a bit of attacks what have been on YouTube, what has happened when normal people watch MMA and they start learning from what's on TV, they already can make a joke, or they try to use their body weight and beat people on the ground. So it's starting to feel for me like that this is starting to be dangerous getting underground. You really have to do everything you can and use a very effective atemi strike or something like that while still standing to put the guy down before you're on the ground, because normal people are starting to learn these MMA fighting skills, or watching TV and learning from them and using them in a brutal way in normal street life.
Yeah, Johnny, there's something else. I was just going to say, I had a student who was already lying on the ground, minding their own business, and they were attacked. So it's not just necessarily going to the ground. You could already be on the ground and be attacked. Fortunately, a student has studied with me for 5 months and combined two techniques they'd never combined before. They were stand-up techniques executed from the ground, and they got away. But so sometimes it's not going to the ground. Things can start on the ground.
Yeah,
look, just think of the basics, right? It's all about going back to the basics. What is Japanese Jiu-Jitsu? And then if you just answer that question, if you're talking about strikes, techniques, striking, joint locks, nerve attacks, throws. Well, I mean, if you go down the list of everything that Japanese Jiu-Jitsu offers to you, then it's just going back to the basics. And then this one's pretty easily identifiable is, who do you see, laying on the ground in battle during a war type scenario. You only see the dead people laying on the ground. That's not where you want to be. It's pretty simple. I mean, just look at it. But can we do? The point is, can we do things on the ground? Yes, we can. Japanese Jiu-Jitsu offers ground techniques, but they're not necessarily ground techniques. They're all designed to be able to do them in an upright position. But if we go to the ground, the unlikely place to be, we could still do those techniques. But do you want to do those techniques in a real life scenario? No, you don't want to be pulling yourself to the ground to compromise to be in the worst place that you could possibly be in a real life scenario.
The only advantage and I agree with you, Darren. I mean, the ground is the worst place to be. Okay. And that's where the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people excel, because that's what their art teaches them where it teaches them how to play, lack of a better phrase. And they are exceptional on the ground, but there are a lot of techniques that they aren't allowed to do on the ground that we can do. And also, mainly like, a lot of the techniques that we do standing, as you said, can be done on the ground. And one of the things you have to realize is that the closer you are to the ground, the more leverage and torque you have over a person who's over you. Okay, standing, sitting, or what have you, because your motion, your technique movements are going to be a lot tighter because you don't have the room to do them, and because they're a lot tighter, as Darren said, it locks the joints, and you have much better throttle control, because now rather than your body being the base, the ground is your base. And if you can use the ground effectively, you're going to be okay. It's like I did a seminar a few months ago, and they wanted to know, what can we do if we're pinned up against a wall? And I said, the wall is your friend. And they didn't realize they could slide sideways on a wall. I mean, some of this stuff is, you just don't think of it. You can slide sideways on a wall, and that gives you the freedom to do you're not going to do any hip throws or stuff like that, but a lot of your locks, joint locks, things of that sort, hand throws, a tamamaki komi, nerve attacks, a lot of these things you can do. And what are they going to impact as you slide out of the way? The wall. The wall is going to be unforgiving, unless it's half-inch drywall. But
True story. True story.
I've had to deal with that too. That's kind of embarrassing. Even sideways, do your technique, and you do it, and it breaks through the drywall. Oops, sorry. So
we had a hole in the dojo wall. Dojo I was in.
The serious thing is, if you're going to do techniques against the wall, you really need to make sure you're working. You've got a brick wall behind you, or something really solid, because that's expensive to repair drywall.
I know it also from a student party.
Pardon?
Drywall are expensive. I also know it from my student party when I started electronics. Drywalls are expensive.
Yes, I mean you want a solid brick wall or concrete wall to work against, But anyway, so
and just real quick too, with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I just want to say, even what we see as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu today is a small part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
yes,
I think Helio Gracie, I have the Helio Gracie book and a couple other books that are like their self-defense, like the actual Jiu-Jitsu of the Gracies. It looks like judo. I mean, it's stand up. Everything is stand up. All the self-defense techniques look just like anything you'd expect anywhere else. And there is the groundwork, of course, but that's a small aspect of what the Gracies historically were teaching and studying. It's this modern thing where now Gracie Jiu-Jitsu has even turned its back on Jiu-Jitsu and become just Newaza, really. Like that's all they focus on. But historically, like I think even the older generation of Gracies would look at this and be like, where's our jujitsu? You know, what did you guys do to it? Why are you immediately going to the ground? Like that's a strategy for winning matches using jujitsu, but
Do
that's
you,
not a
do,
jujitsu strategy.
do you
You know,
know
I think
how
even the Gracies would be mad.
how
There-
many takedowns do you know? You have studied the book. How many takedowns? Because I haven't seen that. They haven't so many variation of takedown. They only have they always take the leg and then they get on the ground. Or they even sit.
There's a lot of that, like there's a lot of that standard, like the guy's behind you and you just do a hip throw. And you know, there's a lot of that stuff, just regular straight up jujitsu. You know, just
Okay.
what you expect. There is like a section where it is what happens on your back and how to control that and all of that. Like that's there. You know, Helio did all that too. But that's like a chapter of it, I think. The rest of it is like somebody's arguing with you and you put your hands up and they come towards you and you give them a hip throw, you know, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And
So
in
this
some of the early Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu books, the techniques aren't even the best options.
Right.
They're not the most effective. And I look at them with a jaundiced eye because it's like, no, you could have done this, this, or this. It would have worked a lot better.
That's a really good point too. Not only is it that original stand-up stuff, some of it is absolutely bad. Like they'll do like gun disarms where they're like grabbing the guy's arm and the gun's still free, you know, that kind of stuff where,
Right.
or a knife, it's like he can
I'm
just
doing a
do
Zoom
this
meeting
with his
right
wrist, you know, all that
yeah,
stuff.
because
Right.
when you see their style, they almost always go after the legs. That you can give a knee in the head pretty easy, but they always go. I haven't seen that they use upstands, okoshi or taiotoshi or any throws or grappling or on the feet because they always go after the feet, and if they don't succeed getting after the feet, then they sit down and wait for an attack that people get on the ground with them.
Okay. I just want to go back and clean up some of this. It's all Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. The Gracie stuff is Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. That's what it is. Like you can't get away from, you can't refer to it as BJJ. There is no BJJ. It's all one origin. Origin is Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. Y'all get me fired up.
I always call it Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I don't like calling it Brazilian.
I dropped some
Jiu-Jitsu that the
photos
Gracies learned.
Yeah.
Yep. Gracie Judo.
Let's get away from
That's what I like.
Brazilian Gracie Jiu-Jitsu here because that's an ongoing battle. And
but yeah.
Hopefully
put some pictures in the chat.
Hopefully at some point it'll go off into the sunset.
There was less emphasis on, there was more emphasis on just jujitsu originally.
Well, I think that happens. I mean,
jiu-jitsu.
There are, even within jujitsu, there are certain sensei that will only teach a certain segment of the art because that's what they're really good at, and everything else is, it's kind of, oh, you can do that, but that's not our specialty. And there are sensei in jiu-jitsu that do. I'm sure that people sensei in other martial arts that do the same thing. And ultimately, if they come up with a system of their own that really works, they that's what's taught. That's what it's called. And the Gracies had some great marketing skills, and I'm not knocking them for it. I wish we all had the same great marketing skills, and then we could have Rasmussen Jitsu, Kirby Jitsu, and Mellorian Jitsu, Clark Jitsu, and Fiora Jitsu. And I also think, just to kind of bring things together here before we close up, all of us, I'm sure, do have different emphases at times. We may teach techniques I said, although we're teaching the same technique, we may actually teach it differently than other senseis, and we may feel that our way is best at times. But what's interesting about Japanese Jujitsu is that you can put a whole bunch of different Jujitsu black belts together, Japanese Jujitsu black belts. And once you get past terminology in English and Japanese and slight differences in technique execution, they can work out beautifully with each other. And I think that's what's the unifying element of the art, and that's what gives it its I say stick-to-itiveness. And also in that type of situation, you get a lot of I can't think of the term now. You learn a different way of doing a technique, and it may not be the way your sensei taught you, and they may get upset with you for doing it. But I say there are many ways to do Tenagi Kotegaishi. There's no one way. There are very few techniques in jiu-jitsu that can only be done one way.
I've learned it's the outcome, not the method.
Right,
Like the
right.
outcome is he's going to start behind you and he's going to end up there. And
Yes.
whatever you did to get him there doesn't matter.
Right. And if you want to make it a hip throw, there are different kinds of hip throw, koshinagi. You know, if you're going to do a strike, you're going to strike a person, there are different kinds of strikes, you know, and it really ultimately is, what is the outcome? What is the result? And I think that's one of the real strengths of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu is that the techniques are the same. And that's, I mean, that's why I enjoy it, because I can go I can visit another Jiu-Jitsu dojo and sit there and watch it. That was really nice. And it's a good variation. I'm going to have to teach that to my kids or my students.
It's building blocks. Jiu-jitsu is building blocks, and if you learn the building blocks, like in your books, also you have made you can make. You have counted the combinations of so and so building blocks, and you get a combinations of it. The important thing is that you just have to put the building blocks together in a good way, so they were useful and right.
Right. I mean, if I had my druthers and had the time, it's the hard part. I really think there are really in jiu-jitsu maybe only 30 or 40 moves or building blocks. It's the combination that drives us nuts. But those building blocks, as Joni is saying, if they are in place, you know, and use a jiu-jitsuka, if they are in place, one of the real advantages of the art is that you become unpredictable. Nobody knows what you're going to do, not even you. And so, you know, if someone says to you, oh, you know jiu-jitsu, big deal. And they swing at you, but they don't know what you're going to do. They think you're going to go in for a hip throw, and maybe all you do is just do a strike to their larynx. And they'll say, that wasn't fair, that was karate. You know, or you do an elbow roll takedown. That wasn't fair, you did Aikido.
Right.
You become unpredictable. And that I think is the real strength of the art. What makes it a lifelong learning process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why it's an art. There's only 5 vowels, and look how many books we have.
Yes.
Look at what you can do with that.
Great analogy. Thank you. I think you tied up this session very nicely.
And just real quick while I've got it here, this is the Gracie book here. So just I randomly opened, you know, that's, I mean, standard stuff right there. Just a standing arm bar, what you do. Here's way back in the book. I'm just skipping ahead, page 156 now. Just standard jujitsu, what to do with a gun, just a hip throw, you know. The stuff you've seen in judo books since like 1890 is
Yeah.
right here. You know, it's what he taught too.
Yeah.
It's
And
funny.
a small part of it, really small part in the back of the book is this stuff. The
Okay.
rest of it is
It's
all,
funny-
you know,
Funny
run
they
of
are.
the mill.
Hey, we should call this discussion A-E-I-O-U.
You. I love it. Gentlemen, I've enjoyed it. I need to bolt.
What?
I want to thank you all.
Yeah.
You know, when you go back to when you're looking at those, Dane, and you're looking for what Sensei had mentioned, which was a great point in terminology. If you try to break it down, and I think if Aries was a part of this as well, he would attest to it because he's mentioned it a few times about there's no BJJ, right? Look, I don't technically I don't believe there's a BJJ. There's a system of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that has been a part of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. But when you talk about terminology, it's recognized, right? Because when you're asking a BJJ practitioner, what is that technique? They have no terminology to define what the technique actually is. They can give you something that they coin a name to it, right? But it's no actual technique. And even their most popular quote unquote technique that they refer to all of the time in Kimura is not a technique, it's a person's name, right? Like we know that. But if you try to take Japanese Jiu-Jitsu techniques and you're like, what is that technique? It actually has a meaning to what it is. It's not just a coined term that we're using. It means something of what you're doing.
Who did
They gave everything brand names. You're right.
Yeah.
That's what they did. They took like sodium bicarbonate and called it like Arm & Hammer or whatever, you know, like
yeah.
No, this is it. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Americana.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, A-E-I-O-U. Anyway,
You have a new toy, Sensei.
anyway, I want to wish all of you the happiest of holidays. Have a Merry Christmas. I hope friend and family are all together. Happy New Year. Our next meeting won't be, I think, until January 3rd or 4th, something like that. Whatever it is, the first Saturday in January. See if you can get some additional people to participate. I'll see what I can do about getting few more people we can pick on. And I shouldn't say that, but I think our strength is having a variety of opinions expressed, and today was pretty good. And I took some notes on what happened today, and they'll get maybe added on as additional topics, or I may just name this session 65. I'll maybe just title it A-E-I-O-U. A-E-I-O-U.
And sometimes why?
Yeah, sometimes right.
One of them is only sometimes even.
And sometimes why?
Great working with you. See you in January.
Old MacDonald had a farm. A-E-I-O-U.
Uh-oh. You're in free fall now.
Have a great weekend.
Bye,
Yeah,
everyone.
Merry Christmas to
Everyone.
everybody. Merry Christmas.
Thanks, guys.
See you next year.
Take care.